In this video, we're going to start looking at the logic of our app. So for now, we're going to focus on the sign up and login processes. So let's start with the sign up process. So once the user clicks on the sign up button after filling the sign up form, we're going to perform a few checks. So first, we're going to check if there are any form errors, like a field missing or an incorrect input. Then we're going to show an error message if anything is wrong. Then we're going to check if the username is already taken. This means that we've got the same username already in our users table. Then we're going to check if the email address is already registered. If we pass all these tests, then we are ready to register our user. But we need to make sure that the user owns the email address that they have provided. So to do this, we're going to create a unique activation code. We're going to use some advanced functions that can create random numbers very highly predictable. Then we're going to insert the user's details with that activation code, just like this. So now in our users table, we're going to have a new row with all the inputs that the user has provided and the activation code that we have created on our side. Now, we're going to send that activation code to the user. So we're going to place the activation code inside a link. So when the user clicks on that link, they will be directed to a PHP file. So the PHP file is going to process the data and is going to compare that activation code that it received from the user with the activation code that we've got in our users table, which corresponds to the email address of that user. So if the two activation codes match, we're going to activate the account. And the activation field in the users table is going to turn to activated. If the activation codes don't match, we're just going to show an error message. Now let's have a look at the login process. So once the user clicks on the login button after providing their email address and password, we're going to check if there are any form errors. Then we're going to look for that user in our users table. So finding the user means that we find the same combination of email address and password that they have provided. So if we don't find any, we're going to show an error message. Otherwise, we're going to log the user in. Logging the user in means that we're going to set session variables that we can use later for things like retrieving their notes, for example. So these variables would be things like their user ID, their username, and email address. And once we've done that, we redirect the user to the notes page. Now, the user, when they log in, they have the option of checking the Remember Me box so that they remember the next time they come back to the website. So if they check that box, we need to do something so that we recognize them if they come back. So we're going to need to store something on their computer, and also we're going to store something on our database. And once they come back, we can match the values that we stored on their computer and on the database. And if we have a match, we log them in. So we're not going to do things like storing their password on their computer. That is not something that we can call as good practice. So what we're going to do, we're going to create two random variables. Okay. And these two variables, we're going to store them somehow in a cookie. And also we're going to store them in a table that we will call Remember Me. So this table is going to have a few columns. So a couple of them are referring to our two variables. Okay. And also we're going to have an expiration date. So you can choose if you want to remember the user for a week, 2 weeks, a month, as you like. Now let's have a look at how we're going to store these variables inside the cookie and inside the table. So when we create these two random variables, Authenticator 1 and authenticator2, we're going to store them in a cookie as a string of text. Okay, so you're going to need to do something like concatenating these two variables, or saying variable1 dot variable2. Okay, and we're going to store them in the cookie in a way that we can retrieve them back from the cookie if we need them. Okay. Now, to store them in the database or in the table, so the first variable is going to be stored as it is. Okay. The second variable, we're going to apply a function f2 to it. Okay. So for simplicity, you can think now about f2 as variable 2 plus 1. So rather than storing variable 2 as it is, we store variable 2 plus 1. But we're going to need to choose a really complicated function. Okay. Now, the user comes back to the website. Okay. And there is no session, which means that the session has been destroyed, so that they're not logged in at the moment. But we find a remember me cookie on their computer. So what are we going to do? We're going to extract the two variables that we stored in the cookie. And then we're going to look for the first one, because we know that we stored the first one as it is in the table. So once we find the first one, we're going to need to match the second one, okay, with the value that we have in our table. So remember that the second one hasn't been stored as it is in the table. So we stored it as f2 of that variable. So we're going to need to compare that value with f2 of the second variable. Okay. If we have a match, we're going to log the user in. Okay. And then we're going to need to do exactly the same thing again, which means we're going to need to generate two variables, store them in the cookie and in the table. Okay. Just like that. So we're going to have a new row in our remember me database. And we're going to store those variables in the cookie as well. Now let's have a look at the forgot password feature. So the user forgot their password and they want to use the forgot password form to reset their password. So first we're going to check if there are any errors. And then we're going to check if the email address they have provided is registered in the users table. If that's the case, we're going to create a unique key. So that key is going to be inserted in the forgot password table along with the other details of our user. So you're going to have a new row. So you're going to have the user ID, the key, and also the time when the key was created. Okay, so we're going to need this column, time, to make sure that the key is still valid. So you can choose to have the key valid for only 24 hours if you like. And also we're going to have the status column, which will tell us whether the key is pending or if the key has already been used. Now, we will email a link to our user. Okay, so the link is going to have both the key and the user ID. Okay, so when the user clicks on that link, they will be redirected to a PHP file. So that PHP file is going to look for a combination of that user ID and key in our forgot password table. So if we find that combination, then we will show the reset password form to our user. Okay. So now this form is going to be a simple form consisting of two fields, a password field and a confirmation field. Okay. So the user will fill those fields and then submits the form. We're going to have a couple of hidden fields, which are going to be the user ID and the key. So these fields are going to be already pre-populated, okay, with the values of the user ID and the key, okay, that we sent in the email. So we're going to need to check these values again and make sure that we've got this combination in the forgot password table. And also we're going to make sure that the key has not expired yet. If everything is fine, then we're going to check the inputs of our user. Otherwise, we show an error message. So if the inputs are fine, we've got the two passwords, they do match, okay, and there are no errors, then we're going to change the key status to used. And also, we're going to update the user password in the users table. Now let's have a look at the structure that we're going to follow for our files in this project. So let's start with the sign up process. So a new user comes to our website. They use the sign up form to sign up. So they will input their details. Okay, they're going to choose a password, confirm the password. And then they will click on the sign up button. So at the moment, we are still in the index.php file. Okay, so we're going to be using Ajax calls, okay, to submit our forms. So we will write some JavaScript code inside a file index.js that we will link to our index.php file. So once I click on the sign up button, an Ajax call is going to be sent to a PHP file called signup.php. So that file is going to process all the data, and it's going to send back either an error message, or we're going to get a success message if everything goes fine. All right. So now an email has been sent to the user. So the signup.php file has sent an email to our user. So now you've got a link inside the email. So that link is going to go to a file called activate.php. So that file, if you click on it, it's going to activate the account or show an error message. Okay, so now let's have a look at the login process. So our user now is registered and they are ready to log in to their account. So they will input their email address and password, and then they will click on the login button. So again, we're going to send an Ajax call, this time to a file called login.php. So again, this file is going to process all the data and send an error message or a success message, or log in our user if everything is fine. So let's click on the login button. Okay, we've got a wrong username or password. Okay, so let's input the right password. Okay, for now, let's keep the remember me box unchecked. Okay, perfect. Now let's log out. Now let's try to log in, but this time checking the remember me box. So if we log in while this file is checked, actually there is a section in the login.php file which is calling the remember me.php file. So this file is taking care of the remember me process, if you remember, creating those two random variables, storing them in a cookie on the user's computer, and also storing them on the remember me table in the database. Okay, and once the user logs in while checking the remember me box, and when they come back later, okay, we're going to have some code that we'll write at the top of the index.php file, okay, which will take care of logging them in if they are remembered. All right, so now let's move to the forgot password feature. So once the user inputs their email address, okay, and click on the submit button, again, we're going to have an Ajax call, this time going to a file called forgotpassword.php. So that file is going to send an error message, or if everything is fine, we're going to have a success message, okay, and this file is going to send us an email with a link. Okay, so once we click on that link, it will take us to a file called resetspassword.php. Okay. So let's click on that link. Now, if everything is fine, we are going to see the form that we can use to reset our password. Otherwise, we will just see an error message. Okay, so once we choose our new password, then click on the Reset Password button, we're going to have a call going to a file called store reset password. So that file is going to take care of the process. So it's going to either send back an error message. Okay. Otherwise, it's just going to store our new password and we get a success message just like that. And we can now log in to our account using the new password. So in the next video, we're going to create all these files as well as these tables. Then we are going to go through the code structure that we're going to use inside each of these files.